You're visiting the Mom Next Door and our stories of faith. I'm glad you dropped by for a visit. Please stay a while and hear what the Lord has done in the lives of moms just like you and me.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Mom Next Door Stories of Faith. I'm your host, Pam Fields. And I'm going to ask you, has God ever given you something really big to steward? Have you ever wondered how you might carry that load? I'm sure that there have been days that have been unspeakably hard, and you wonder if you're able. Well, recently I was reading Matthew 25, the parable of the talents, and I'm sure you're familiar with that. What struck me was the part when the master had given the gifts to each person, the five, and was it the three or two, and then the one, I think it was five, three, and one. And they each came back with different results. But what hit me was when it said, each one of you was given these talents according to your ability. And it made me think, like, if God's given us these talents according to our ability, he made us. And if he made us for a purpose and on purpose, and with the knowledge that of what he would call us to, what's the verse? I think it's Ephesians, about the work that he has created in advance for you to do. So I was thinking, wow, why do I get so wimpy and afraid when I see a task in front of me and I'm like, I don't think I can do it. I don't really know. And I just work myself up instead of resting in the knowledge that God created each of us with abilities for the tasks that he has put in front of us. And when I was reading this, I also thought about an interview that I did about 4 years ago with Karol. And she was talking about Ephesians 4, verse 7. And that talked about grace according to gifts and about God's favor and his grace, that, those are the spiritual gifts he gives uniquely to every believer according to what God has for their purpose. And so it was just so funny that as I was reading that portion in Matthew, I actually had Karol on my schedule to record with. And so right now, I'm just excited that I get to talk with her again. And I am wondering, what do you guys have today? Do you have something that he has put on your heart and you're wondering if God has given you grace or ability to do that? Because I know there's something. Now, Karol, I am just going to ask you to give us a quick overview of your story. If people want to get the whole thing, we can go back to episode 73, I believe it was, and I can put links to those in the show notes. But you've got a long and fairly complicated story. Lots of things have happened. Tragedy, heartache, some joys, and some precious memories. And so I got to direct them back to that earlier podcast for the full story. But can you just give me a quick flyover, tell me about your family dynamic, and then let's pick up today where you are.
First of all, I'm happy to be here. It's exciting for me to be able to kind of tell the continuing story from when we first did this a few years back, 4 years ago. A lot has changed. And if I look back, I think we were kind of in a really difficult phase at that point. So quick overview, my husband and I married when we were really young. We had 4 biological children, and we're kind of living, the proverbial American dream when we actually were praying the prayer of Jabez, Lord, expand my territory. And I do have to say that if you want to pray that prayer, be very careful, because he will answer that prayer, and it may not look like we think it's going to look. And so as we were praying that prayer, the Lord brought a critically ill child into our life, and essentially asked us to care for him. We had not sought adoption, but we did end up adopting him. That was our son, Moise. He had multiple disabilities and complex medical needs. Um, a few years later, we actually adopted another child. She had Down syndrome. That was Jelaine. Unfortunately, she passed away when she was 2.5 years old, and in an accident. And so that was pretty devastating. And it just kind of left our family reeling. And that we spent a few years just navigating child loss, getting my kids through. It was a very traumatic death. And so getting my kids through the trauma. And then a few years later, the Lord brought another child to us and asked us to parent another child with disabilities. And that was our son, Cruz. Cruz has a very rare genetic disorder. He's 13 now, and he's pretty much the joy of our life.
Hmm.
And so we're thankful for that. And it's just been a journey. There's been a lot of joy, um, a lot of sorrow, a lot of suffering, and incredible growth.
Yeah.
I believe that the Lord brings trials into our life to make us better, and I do believe that has happened. And just has definitely deepened my relationship with Him. Um, I had to draw closer to Him in
Yeah.
order to endure some of the suffering that has washed upon our shore.
Yeah. And, I follow you on Instagram, and even though there's been so much hard and heavy stuff in your life, your Instagram page exudes joy and thankfulness and just a peace, which, I mean, that's incredible. It's incredible that the Lord is able to put that in you when you have gone through so much hardship. So today I think we're going to talk about Moise. And
Mhm.
um, let's see, you mentioned how, well, I'm not sure you mentioned exactly how you got him, just that you adopted him. So maybe a real brief how you brought him here, because I know that again is a story in and of itself.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was one phone call that literally changed the trajectory of our entire life. Um, we got a call from, it was kind of a friend of a friend of a friend type situation. And they asked us, I have a medical background. So it was, would you be interested in being a short-term host family for a critically ill child who was going to be coming in on a plane? We had 2 days to think about this, um, to have life-saving open heart surgery. And naively, we thought, how hard could it really be to care for one little baby for 4 or 5 months? I mean, we already had 4 children at that time. Our oldest was 8, and then we had 4, and our youngest was 3. And so we were incredibly naive, and we had no idea what we were walking into. But I did know the moment, we agreed to do it. And I can remember he came in on a private jet with several other kids who were going to be having surgery. And I remember the moment that pilot put that baby in my arms, I took one look at him, and it's just like my blood ran cold, because I was prepared for a sick baby, but I was not prepared for this kind of sick. And
Yeah.
my medical eye took it in, and I was like, I am never going to be the same.
Yeah.
And my life is never going to be the same. Long story short, we had the surgery. It was very complex. There were a lot of complexities. Spent literally that entire summer in the hospital. And then when it was time for him to go back, something just didn't sit right with me. I knew there was something wrong with him. And we finally did a brain scan that revealed severe brain damage. And Moise had basically his brain, his heart, was attacked in utero by a virus. So He was diagnosed with congenital cytomegalovirus. He was deaf and blind, or he was deaf, and then he later lost his vision. He had a heart condition, cerebral palsy, and a profound cognitive delay
Mhm.
or disability.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
isn't it? You said like in your youth and excitedness, and you're like, I have four children. Yes, I can take care of a baby short term, not a big deal. If you would have known um, then where you knew it was going to be, like I don't think, the
not a
Lord
chance,
reveals, right. The Lord reveals
not a
things
chance.
for us to us little by little, and then gives us the strength for each day, right? The strength for each day and a hope for tomorrow. If we would know where we're going to have to walk in the future, how hesitant we would be to say yes to God. But when we do step forward and trust Him, He walks with us each step of the way.
I always say for Moise and for us, I mean, we were selfish people. I mean, we wanted our life to be the way we wanted our life to be. And this was just like a little mission project that we were doing, a eh, feel good thing that we were doing. And never, ever would I have even considered doing this if I had any idea how it was going to change my life and how,
Yeah.
my life would never be the same. And I often say for us, love had to come first because by the time
Mhm.
we knew that he was brain damaged and that um, he couldn't go back to, he would die if he went back to Haiti. By
Right.
the time we knew that, even then, it was a very difficult decision,
Yeah.
knowing then that, okay, this is going to be really hard.
Yeah.
But we had had him for 5 months and we loved him. And
Yeah.
so love came
Yeah.
first. And the Lord knew that. He
Yeah.
knew that love had to come first.
Yeah.
And so to me, I mean, it's just so beautiful the way that he has just orchestrated it. And in this, I realized that my husband and I have a gift for knowing and understanding the needs of the developmentally disabled. Um, there just is an intuition in me that it is not me, it is the Lord. And he has just poured his grace out. And it's just been so clear that when he brings you something hard, he's going to walk through it with you and he
Hmm.
is going to give you what you need. And
Hmm.
he has over and over and over. I have seen it, just his provision. And it's
Hmm.
just been one of the words I use is awful, beautiful. It just has been an awful, beautiful journey.
You said that in your first book that you wrote about him, and isn't that's called Grace According to Gifts, I think?
Yep.
And I read that in there, the awful beautiful
Yeah.
or beautiful
Yeah.
awful.
I think I wrote it as awful beauty.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, okay, so tell us a little bit, bring us a little more recent with Moise. I don't know how you want to lead in, but I mean, he's grown up. He grew up to be 18 and then 20, and drop us in wherever you need to there.
Okay. So I think, as I mentioned, we were in the middle of sort of a crisis at that time. I don't even know if I had told you that or if I had shared that, but we were in the middle of a crisis at that time.
Hmm.
When Moise was 13, he lost his vision, which was incredibly hard for him because he had been deaf since he was like 10 months old. And so we relied heavily on sign language, and he lost his vision, which meant that we lost our communication. And it was that point that we kind of saw a shift in him. He just
Hmm.
wasn't as happy as he was, and his life was just boring. I mean, he sat in a silent, dark world. And so 13, we kind of saw a little bit of a loss of joy. And then when he turned 17, I don't know what it was, but it was like somebody flipped a switch in him and he started to become very angry and very aggressive. And it began at school. We weren't seeing it at home. And then all of a sudden we started seeing that shift to home and it turned into absolute violence in our home. Um, he was in a wheelchair, but he would throw himself out of his wheelchair and just like army crawl after people, throw furniture, tip over chairs, hurting me.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
he did some self-injury, beating his head on the floor. And so we would intervene to try to protect him. And that's when he would really go after us. And the biggest crisis that we had in our home, it was all a crisis, but our son Cruz, who was around 7 or 8 at the time, he's very small in stature. So 7 or 8, but looks like a 4-year-old. He has a severe bleeding disorder. And so a blow to the head in Cruz could be fatal. And so we had this very strong 18, 17, 18-year-old who's literally throwing furniture, who, it was like I remember the Incredible Hulk, how like this really nice guy and something would happen and he turned into this Hulk, this beast.
Mhm.
I often liken Maurice to that because he could be sitting there so docile and calm and like literally something flipped a switch and you'd hear this loud yell and then he would just go off into this rage like
Mhm.
and he was so strong. And I always say he was no respecter of persons. He didn't care who was around him. Anything within his reach was at risk. And so our concern for Cruz was very great. We had literally a deadly combination in our home between
Yeah.
with a violent son and a very vulnerable little boy.
Right.
During this time, we had reached out for help, and that was where we began to realize that the system is very broken when it comes to adults with developmental disabilities. There's all kinds of services for children.
Mhm.
In many states, some states do it well, but for the most part, this is a problem, a crisis in many states. I am in
Mhm.
Illinois, and this is a huge crisis in Illinois that there is just
Mhm.
not a lot of services for adults with developmental disabilities. And
Mhm.
there are, I've done some research. There are thousands of families who are needing services. There are many families who are in crisis, but there was no help for us. We were reaching out, you know, we need help. The school got to, so in Illinois, you can receive school services until your 22nd birthday if you have an IEP and you have disabilities. Um, so technically, he was still eligible for school services. However, the school that he attended was for people with severe and profound disabilities. They have a
Mhm.
very vulnerable population.
Yeah.
And they said he cannot come to school anymore because he puts everybody in our school at risk. So now we're facing, you know, I'm home all day, every day with this young man who was much bigger than me,
Mhm.
um, and literally was beating me up. And
Mhm.
it escalated to where these behaviors were happening all day, all in the middle of the night. We'd wake to just the screaming and beating, beating against the walls and tearing doors off of their hinges. And I'd try to put him in the car, and we had numerous police calls. He'd try to pull the car off of the road, or I'd put him in the back seat and he'd start attacking me, beating on my head. It was just a horrible, horrible situation. Um, and then just trying to keep Cruz safe. Cruz was starting to suffer emotionally just from all the trauma in the home.
Mhm. Mhm.
Fortunately, our older biological kids had moved out. We had grandchildren by this time, and they really couldn't bring the babies to the house because it just wasn't safe.
Yeah.
And my husband and I, we have been through a lot together,
Mhm.
and we've been very strong together, and we work together, but we were quickly reaching a breaking point, the point
Yeah.
of like, we cannot do this. Our sleep was disrupted by these behaviors, and emotionally, physically, spiritually, we were at the end of our rope,
Mhm.
but there was no help. There is a facility that is 7 minutes from my home. Wonderful, wonderful facility. And they had wanted to help us, but it was the same situation. They have a vulnerable population, and they needed to protect the
Mhm.
other people that reside in this facility.
There's incredible conflict within yourself, I'm sure. And in each place that you represented, you've got the care homes that are trying to protect their vulnerable population, yet Moise is vulnerable. And then your home, you're trying to protect Cruz and yourself and your emotional, spiritual, mental, physical health, your grandchildren. So it's such a conflict because your heart is fully invested in each place, but there just doesn't seem to be a good solution. And so I have to think about Moise too, is, I know he was not intentionally trying to cause trouble or to hurt people. He had to be processing through and dealing with his world that he could not see, he could not hear. I mean, I just think about the senses and like the way he had to register his world was through his touch and through motion. And so you've got everything that is calibrating for him, and your heart is just breaking for this young man. And then also breaking for, I mean, so many levels of complexity to this. And I just, I can't imagine. But you were able to get a little advice and move forward. Little tough, the
Yeah.
advice.
Yeah. So back up just a little bit. So you are correct. I refer to Moise and all of our adopted children, any person who has developmental disabilities, as an eternal child. So they are children, and they are innocent. And absolutely, Moise did not want to hurt people. It was like his mind was tormented with suffering. He had a lot of medical issues, so he had a lot of pain, and he didn't know how to express it. He had no means of expression. Um, and it was suffering, just year after year of suffering, and it was just like he just couldn't do it anymore. And so when he would have one of these behaviors, once he would come down off of them and he would calm, and a lot of times it was either myself or my husband literally pinning him to the ground. And once it was over, we always knew it was over because he would weep, and he would just hold put his head on our shoulder and just weep. Like, and he would say, "I'm sorry, I love you." He would sign to me, "I'm sorry, I love you, mom. I love you, mom." And it was just so heartbreaking. So yes, we were just so torn. But so the advice that we were given was they had looked for, a residential placement throughout the entire state of Illinois and a school residential placement in the entire United States. There was one that possibly would have considered him in Massachusetts. Um, but then things escalated so quickly. I believe they didn't have a placement at that time. And so what we were dealing with, which is a problem, and this is part of the crisis. So there are facilities for individuals with developmental disabilities. But the problem comes when you have a dual diagnosis of intellectual disability and complex medical needs, or intellectual disabilities with behavioral disorders. Moise had all three of them, because when you have a vulnerable population, and then you have, like, say they have the complex medical needs, a facility is able to meet all of those needs, but then they can't meet the needs of the aggressive person.
Mhm. Yeah.
Flip it around, if they can meet the needs of the aggressive person, they're not able to meet complex medical needs because of the vulnerability. And so we had all three situations. And so this is where the real crisis is in these dual diagnoses. So the advice that we were given after we had exhausted all of our options, and this went on for 18 months to 2 years of this just brokenness in our home. And so the advice that we were given was that we would probably have to take him to the emergency room and leave him there because we had taken him to the emergency room multiple times. And what would happen is we would get there and they would say, well, there's nothing medically wrong with him, so we can't admit him. Because he was nonverbal, any psychiatric evaluation was really pretty ineffective. And so he couldn't be admitted to a psych floor because he was nonverbal. And so in a normal situation with a typical adult, if someone was behaving this way, they would have either gone to jail, which of course we didn't want that for Moise. They would have been, admitted to a psych ward for psychiatric help. There is none of that available for adults with developmental disabilities. So what we had been advised was that we would have to just go and refuse to leave the hospital until somebody stepped in and helped us. And so one Sunday morning, at this point, we had not gone to church together, my husband and I, for years because we couldn't take Moise to church. And so Cruz and Moise had gone to church, and we'd had a difficult situation with Cruz the other day, the day before, and we had reached a point where we said, okay, the next time this happens, we're going to have to do exactly what we were advised to do. So I hear Moise screaming. I heard a piece of furniture tipped over and went back. He came after me. I called 911. We had him taken to the emergency room, and then it happened. They came in and said, we can't do anything for you here. So we're going to give you our discharge papers. And I said, I can't take him home. And at this point, I felt very much like I was having to choose between my two boys. I had Cruz and I had Moise. They could not live in the same home. I have to pick one. And a very wise man told me that as an adult, even though he was very vulnerable, my responsibility was to Cruz because Cruz was a child, Moise was an adult. So my primary responsibility was to keep Cruz. So I was telling them, he's going to kill my little boy at home. And they were just like, well, we can't, I'm sorry, that's not our problem. And what I had not expected was that they said that they were going to have us escorted out by a security if I didn't leave. So I had called the crisis team that had advised us to stay there. I called my husband, and both of them said, Karol, you have to walk out and leave him there. And it was the most awful thing I've ever done. I walked out of that hospital with the hospital staff telling me that I can't do this. They're going to call Adult Protective Services. And I left my 19-year-old, actually, who was 18 at the time, nonverbal, non-ambulatory, deaf, cognitively delayed son in the emergency room. It was devastating. And then for 24 hours, I had no idea. We had no idea what was happening. And finally, we got a call from behavioral health and like the director of the hospital. It was a three-way call. Like there were several people on this call. And they were pretty angry. They were just like, this boy is not our responsibility. We have no idea what to do with him. He can't talk to us. We don't know what to do with him. And I finally just kind of yelled into the phone and I said, can you just let me explain? And they did. They let me explain. And once I explained the situation and how we had been trying for 18 months to get help, the hospital just kind of did it like a complete turnaround. And they were like, okay, we're going to help you, but here's what has to happen. Moise has to be declared homeless. And I, I just, it was awful. How can this be? And yet, in my mind, I, we told ourselves this is nothing more than a formality. So we could not bring him out of the hospital because once we put him in our car, he was not homeless. If they admitted him, he was not homeless. If he was in a regular bed in the ER, he was not homeless. So they put him in the hallway of the emergency room. It was December, where all of the homeless people in the city would come, and that's where they would put them. They called it, I'm not even going to say what they called it, but it was the homeless hall. And
Just
Maurice,
pure survival. People were there just simply to stay out of the cold,
yeah,
not for any sort of care, no food, no, just
no.
literally stay here so you don't freeze to death. And that's otherwise you're on your own.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they did. So they did tell us that we could be good Samaritans. And so my husband and I and our four kids, our four adult kids, and a couple of friends of mine, a couple of really close friends of mine, we set up a rotation, around the clock rotation, that somebody was with Maurice and somebody was with Cruz at all times. And we took his meds. He never was allowed a shower. Um, we took him to a public bathroom and would wash him up, brush his teeth. We took his food up, and we just cared for him there in that bed for 5 days.
And there was no way to communicate to him why he's laying on this floor or why he's sitting there and he has no knowledge of who's around him or anything. If your family and your friends had not gone and ministered to him, had not scheduled that 24-hour presence with him, I just can't imagine how devastating, you know. That is the hands and feet of God to go and step in and look out for him. He was so vulnerable. So he was there for, gotta get back on track here, Carol.
Yeah,
How long was he there? And then what was the next step?
5 days.
What happened?
And they did,
5 days.
let me clarify, they did have a bed. And like
Okay.
all homeless people were like on stretchers. And so they
Okay.
did have a bed. Um,
Okay.
and he was on like a stretcher or whatever. And, the hospital staff learned our story and they were very compassionate and they would stop by and, of their own, on their own, they would bring little things to us. Like, somebody
Mm.
would go to the cafeteria and grab something. They could do that as pay for something out of their own pocket, or like I
Right.
would give them money and they could act as good Samaritans too. But there were, they couldn't
Right.
give him any meds. We couldn't
Right.
use, a shower or whatever.
Mm-mm.
So in the meantime, the hospital had reached out to a state representative, and he pulled some strings to have an emergency placement made for Moise in, it's called a state operated developmental center. There are seven, we call them SODCs. There are seven SODCs in the state of Illinois. This one was 2 hours away from us. And they had told us that this was going to be a short-term stabilization home. They would get him stabilized, and then the facility near home um, would be able to accommodate him. And we had a lot of hope, and we were excited. And this was in December of 2019. We all know what happened in March of 20. The entire
Yeah.
world shut down,
Yeah.
and we did not lay eyes on him for 8 months.
8. Did
Uh,
I hear you? Months or weeks? What did you say?
months,
8
months.
months. 8 months.
I couldn't call him because he's deaf. Did not, I didn't lay eyes on him.
Yeah.
Um, and we began to realize that the care there was less than ideal.
Mm.
And that he basically was just sitting. He was sitting, and it was supposed to be a stabilization home, and they weren't doing anything to stabilize him. And basically, he ended up being there for 4.5 years. And I'm not going to go into all of the things that
Went
were
wrong.
wrong.
Yeah.
Um, I did end up reporting them because there was a pretty horrific thing that happened there. Um, well, I will just go ahead and say um, something happened. I don't really know what, but Moise lost his eye. We had to have his eye removed while we were there.
Mm.
And again, I'm not going to go into all of that, but we came to a place during the entire 4.5 years. It was the darkest period of my life because, and it was just this waiting time of, I knew we had to get him out of there. I knew like there was just this, what was right for Moise wasn't what was right for Cruz.
Yeah.
And so I knew I could, like, how do you reconcile that? What's right for one child is so very unsafe for your other child. And
Yeah.
like we knew if it had been only me, I probably would have let him kill me.
Yeah.
But I had to protect Cruz. And so we were in this 4.5 years of back and forth. Like, I need to get him out of there, but how? And we'd maybe bring him home for, an appointment or something. And we'd be like, okay, we're going to bring him back home. We're going to keep him home. Well, then he'd have one of those behaviors and
Hmm.
right back, like, we can't take care of him.
Hmm.
And, meanwhile, my physical body was not as able as I wasn't as, and so I
Right.
wasn't able to handle him as well as what I had been able to when he
Right.
was at home.
Right. Right.
And so 4.5 years of pleading with God to get, so my perspective shifted during that 4.5 years to an eternal perspective. I that is how I survived it, to view Moise as an eternal child. Um, this was a season, a long season. His whole life was a season of suffering, but it was a season, and one day Moise would be in heaven.
Yeah.
And so my prayer started shifting to let him be free, no matter what that might look like. Um, he had another diagnosis in there and just he had a lot of pain. They weren't managing that well. And so I started praying three things. One, get him out of there.
Hmm.
Two, with COVID and everything and a new diagnosis, don't let him die alone without people he loves. And three, set him free. Whatever
Yeah.
that looks like, set him free.
Mm.
Um, so he went there in December of 2019, April of 24. We finally were able to get him out of there. I had contacted the facility and I begged them. I told them the situation and I just said, we, I have to get him out of there. And I just said, you're 7 minutes from my home. I will come and take care of him every day. Staffing was a big issue as it is everywhere since COVID. And so I just was like, if it's short staff, I'll come. I will come and take care of him. I just need to be able to keep Cruz home. And just God intervened and he answered that prayer and he brought him to, this facility. And it was this facility was like it was just so beautiful. They did more for him in 48 hours than the SODC did in 4.5 years.
Yeah.
And they figured out his behaviors. And while he was still having them, they were managed.
Hmm. Hmm.
And he was better than I had seen him in. I mean, he was just doing beautiful.
Hmm.
And he was there for 7 months.
Hmm.
And in November of 24, um, just kind of out of the blue, I got a call um, that they had sent him to the emergency room. He was having some trouble breathing. And I knew when I walked in to the hospital, that this was an illness unlike anything we had ever had with Maurice. And we, trust me, have had a lot of illnesses and a lot of times where we didn't know if he was going to pull through. But when I walked in, it was like I could feel this shift in Maurice's spirit. And 3 days later, he was set free. And um,
Hmm.
it was devastating.
Yeah.
But
But that awful
God,
beautiful again,
God
right?
answered awful beautiful. God answered all three of those prayers. He got him out of there.
Yeah.
He set him free. And in those 3 days, we knew we had reached a point of no return, and he actually was on hospice. We brought him home on hospice. My daughter, I hadn't even thought of it, but my daughter was like, why don't we take him home? And my son lives in Montana. He made it home an hour before Maurice passed.
Mm.
And Maurice passed with all of us. We were just all there. We held his
Yeah.
hand as he stepped into heaven. We all were holding him as he took his very first steps of his life were in heaven. The
Mm.
first word he ever spoke was in heaven.
Wow.
And God just answered all of those prayers.
Surrounded by the people who have walked with him from just, the moment obviously he stepped foot in the United States.
Yes.
What a story. What a trial, what a testimony. And like I was saying earlier, we recorded 4 years ago, um, and gave all sorts of details about Moise and Jalen and Jalen, I'm sorry,
Jelaine. Jelaine.
Jelaine. And so that was a beautiful story there too. Um, I guess I know people can push pause on this and come back later as we kind of are very long in this episode, but your story is so compelling. And I mean, I think we all have to think, I can't imagine being in your shoes. I can't imagine if this was my family and my situation. Um, but where are you today? What happens from here forward? I know in the last episode, I kind of think that we talked a lot about community. Um, and community today looks different for you. That the things that the Lord is leading you to walk into today look very different than that caregiving role. I mean, you're still caregiving, crews and all, but the your experience with Moise has sent you on a different trajectory and given you some new purpose. And I know we don't have all the time in the world. And I just hope that those who feel like this is getting kind of long, like, you know what, that's okay. Push pause, come back when you have a minute and you're throwing in a load of laundry and you need to just, take a walk or whatever, come back and finish the story. Because today you are going to challenge us to how we can join your story and join in community with people who are in situations very similar to this. We're like, Lord, how can we step in and be part of the solution? I wrote down the reference Proverbs 31, 8 and 9, but I didn't write it out. You might have it written somewhere,
Yes,
but
I do. It's,
you read
speak
it.
up for those who cannot speak for themselves.
Yeah. And and then in Matthew 25, whatever's done for the least of these is done unto the Lord. So, okay, there we go. Set us up. Tell us what's going on right now and how we can support you and the community of people that are walking this very complicated road.
Okay, I'm gonna start with two verses, Matthew 25:40. And the
Okay.
king will reply, truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it for me. And then also Psalms, I actually have it written down here. Psalms 82:3. Defend the weak and the fatherless, uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed. People with developmental disabilities are the very least of these. They are reliant on someone else for all of their needs. They have no way of accumulating wealth. They have no way of taking care of themselves. They are the very least of the least, and they are the most underserved population in probably the world, without question, in the United States. There is a tremendous lack of services, and many states are in crisis. Um, Illinois, I can speak very much for Illinois. I can't speak for every state, but I know that the majority of states are in crisis because there's a lack of services. Um, there is a tsunami of kids who are going to be aging out of the school district because we've seen this rise in behavioral disorders and the rise in autism, and there is a tsunami of kids who are going to be aging out of the school district who are going to need long-term care. And a lot of them have aggressive behaviors, and the parents are not able to care for them.
Mm-hmm.
There is no help for them. Once you age out of the school system, the services come to a screeching halt. And so put yourself in that situation that you have to quit your job. So it's a financial strain. There's no help. You can't hire a babysitter because in our case, the caregivers were scared of him, a lot of them. So we couldn't keep a good caregiver. I take that back. We had some wonderful caregivers who did stick with us through the whole time, but it wasn't safe. And
Right.
so just think about what that does. The majority of your listeners, I am going to guess, are pro-life. And I have to ask this question. Are we really pro-life? Are we pro all of life? Or are we pro fetus? Because how can we
Mm.
say, do not kill that fetus that has been diagnosed with brain damage and then never consider what happens to that baby or that mother who's raising this severely disabled child for the rest of their life? They get
Mm-hmm.
into their 60s and they have a 40-year-old child that they're still caring for. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lack of services, there's a lack of funding. And so to me, yes, it is. I don't understand why it seems that the Church of Jesus Christ, our society, does not view this population of people as a mission or a ministry. Yeah, we have there are some churches who might have, a special needs ministry in their church for Sundays.
But it's
But
usually
what
it's
about everyday
children.
life?
It's children. Like a lot of the
Yes,
special needs
yes,
things, it's like we're gonna help the parents who have special needs children, but we're really focused on the childhood years. And I see that. And when you
yeah.
explained
And
that to
then,
me, it
and a
made
lot of them
perfect
stop
sense.
at like teenage years. Well, that is when things start getting really interesting because now we have these hormones that are coming into play with,
Mm,
possibly the children who have no voice. They don't know what to do with all this stuff that's going in. It comes out as aggression
mm,
or,
yeah.
just adverse behaviors. And so we're abandoning these families when things start getting really, really awful. And so I guess I the world needs to know that
Yeah.
there is a crisis.
Yeah.
The world needs to know that there is a tsunami coming, and our most vulnerable people in the world are not being served. And Um, I understand that serving this population looks overwhelming. It's hard. People feel awkward around people who have disabilities. Um, but I guess I have a plea to examine your heart and see how can you reach out to this population of people. They are in every community. There are the families, they kind of disappear from society because once that behavior starts, you really can't go out in society. You can't go to church. And so who are those people in your community
Mm.
and how can we help? And one of the ways is, there's called intermediate care facilities, which is like a larger um, facility that helps people with disability, or like they can reside there, and then they can also meet medical needs. There are a lot of times they're called SILAs, community integrated living arrangements, where it's just a house where several people live together and they have round the clock care.
Mm-hmm.
How can you support those facilities?
Mm-hmm.
Volunteering, financial
Mm-hmm.
support. I often ask, I speak to, some groups, and one of the first things I always ask is, when is the last time you have been asked to donate to a charity that supports adults, not children, adults with developmental disabilities? And a lot of times I'm met with blank stares, and I have to
Yeah.
ask that question. Why?
Yeah.
Why? And I know that it seems overwhelming, but one of the verses I really want to share is Isaiah 41:3. For I am the Lord your God who takes hold of your right hand and says to you, fear not, I will help you.
Mm.
When the Lord lays something upon our heart, don't be afraid to take a bold step because he's going to help us. And
Yeah.
when he lays that something on your heart, if he brings you to it, he is going to bring you through it.
Yeah.
And these people are my son touched so many lives, and
Yeah.
so many lives were changed because of him.
Yeah.
And you know what? I think they're still being changed even after he is gone.
Yeah. Yeah. His story. Um, I think as I sit at home with my children and grandchildren around, and I look at the needs, man, the needs in my home, the needs in my city, the needs, you see things on social media all around the world. There's this overwhelming, and it does, you mentioned that, like when you look at it, it's so huge and it's so overwhelming. Well, you know what? God doesn't ask us to solve the problems of the whole world and to fix everything ourselves, right? He calls us to be responsible for what is in front of us and what can we do in our own community. The name of this podcast, The Mom Next Door, so are there women, are there families in your neighborhood that are carrying a load like this? And how I think raising awareness. I'm so thankful you're here to raise awareness. If that's all it does is tell people, like, keep your eyes open. Did you know this? Next time you see somebody or hear about somebody, you know what? Could you pick up their groceries for them and drop them off at their house? Could you make them a meal because their days are filled? Can you take them a meal and deliver it? Is there legislation in your community that you need to be aware of, that you can share a post, share the information, make a phone call to your senator, make a phone call, send an email. Like they're not solving the problem as a whole, right? But together, we can care for our own families at home and steward what God has given us there. But also give in these small ways so that it can soften the load that these other families carry. And so I think that, um, well, I'm a little speechless, as I think I always am when I talk to you or when I look at your Instagram page. So maybe I just need to cut my words short and um, say that you have an Instagram page, you have a website. Um, I'm going to put links for those in the show notes or description so that people can go follow you and your story because you will continue to educate us and they can get to meet your beautiful children and look through, I mean, photo chronicles, right, of what we see. Because Moise and your children, they have had a testimony that continues to touch. Um, I think about small joys and victories that have gone along the way in front of you, and it seems like a lot has been tipped to the other side. Um, a lot of struggle, grief, trauma, heartache. But in that purpose that God has for you, and He has for all of us, He uses these to grow us in to be more like Christ, who is compassionate and loving, and He came for the least of these. And so, whatever we are facing today, whatever you listeners are facing today, I think this is just an encouragement to step forward and know that God has created you for whatever He has put across your path. And He's also created you with the ability to do those things. And maybe it's the phone call to the legislator. Maybe it's sharing this podcast with somebody to say, one, you're not alone. There's another gal who has walked that road. And she continues on and perseveres. And I know you can do it too. Or maybe it's to share this podcast with somebody who is in a place of position, who can push it a little further down the road and advocate. And so I'm asking you to do that. And as we close, Karol, I'll ask if there's any last words, and then would you just please close us out in prayer?
Sure. I have one verse I would like to add. And this is a challenge. This verse is a challenge. It's Luke 14:13-14. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although
Mm,
they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous.
mm,
When is the last time you invited the crippled and the lame into your
mm,
home or to come alongside of them? And I have to ask one last question. I'm going to reiterate this. Are we pro-life
mm,
or are we pro-fetus?
mm,
And I will pray now. Heavenly Father, it is you who spoke the world into being. It is you who breathes life into each one of us. Thank you for the hope that we have in you and the confidence that you are sovereign and that nothing happens without your passing through your throne room. We don't understand your ways sometimes, Father, but we know that you do not make mistakes. You know that every life that you create has value and it is important and it is used by you. And so, Father, I just thank you for this opportunity to share with Pam. I pray for the people who are listening. I pray that you would stir the hearts of others to see this voiceless, almost invisible, and yet such a large population of people, of individuals, of your children. Help us not to see them as someone we need to take care of, but to see them as your children. I just pray that you would move hearts. I pray for the mamas out there who are struggling in whatever it is that they have in their life. If there's kids with disabilities or complex medical needs or whatever it is, just pray for them. We lift them up to you. We pray that you would be at work in their lives and that you would um, just invite them into your presence and that you would help them to feel your nearness. That your Holy Spirit would be at work in them. I just pray Father, that you would be glorified through this podcast that Pam has, and that you would just continue to work in it and through Pam. We love you so much, Father. We glorify you, and we commit all these things through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Amen. And I just realized I forgot to mention that you have another book coming out, or has just come out. And I want to tell people about that. The description, or the link.
Summary.
That's what I'm thinking. The link,
Okay.
the link and the name and all those things are going to be in the show notes. Now, when we are recording right now, it's not quite released. So do we have a name for it yet that they'll be able to look for? Or we're just going to catch that up in the notes?
We do. It's called Only Jesus Knows, and the subtitle is Loving the World's Most Vulnerable.
Okay. So as that comes out, boy, I want you guys to share. Let's help Karol get the word out. Yeah. Thank you for being here. And it's been a great time. And I just thank you for your service to the least of these. And I'll catch up with you again. All right. Bye-bye, folks.
Thank you.
I hope that you've been encouraged or challenged in your faith today, and that something we discussed prompts you to grow deeper in your walk with the Lord. If it has, make sure you tell a friend so they can grow along with you. And if you or a friend would like to be a guest and share about God's faithfulness in your life, please email me at podcast@tendingfields.net. Because when we tell of God's faithfulness, we never run out of stories.
Whatever is true.